So let me tell you about this video. What you're going to learn are two unorthodox techniques purely as a result of my laziness. Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Daniel Jason Booth from splmixing.com. Today I'm going to show you two unorthodox compression techniques. You're in a mixing session, maybe you've run out of options, you've done parallel, serial, all the ones that I've covered on the channel in the past. Today I'm going to show you two new ways of compressing something. Often when I get a vocal that's dynamic, my first thought is I probably should ride the vocal. Truth be told, I could not be bothered. It's just too time consuming, really. And who can be bothered? Who's got the time to go through and do all those rides? Technique number one is actually using a gate. It's not using a compressor at all. I'm just going to show you the technique first, and then we'll talk about why you would use it and when you would use it. I've called it a compression technique, and it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. And that's what makes it unorthodox. We've got a lead vocal here. It's quite dynamic. Got these massive peaks, okay? And then we've got all this soft stuff happening in between. Traditionally, if you put that through a compressor, it's going to squash those peaks, but it's not going to be really transparent. So the solution that I came up with was to duplicate the track, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of that. I'm going to go invert, and we're going to flip that track upside down. And what that does is, if I play it now, it completely cancels. What you can do is you can ride this down, and then it's not completely cancelling. All it's doing really is it's just making a little bit quieter. Loving me's like a roller coaster ride. If I push it in the other direction above unity gain, that's the 0 on the volume fader, it will give you the same result. Loving me's like a roller, until we go equal volume on both tracks. So what makes this technique work is to actually go in and use a gate. Today I'm going to use this gate here because I like the curve that it gives me. A gate and an expander are very similar, except a gate is like it's open and then it's shut, typically speaking. An expander eases into that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the open all the way up, and I'm going to never close it. And I'm going to have a fast attack so that it's letting through some of the signal quite quickly. What I will do is I'm going to put it just on that second track that I've created, the duplicate track. I'm going to bring down this floor and just put a nice gentle curve there. And that means that at this point you can see it there. The gain reduction meter is saying that it's actually turned down by that amount. The theory goes that as the signal gets louder, it gets louder. It's very much the polar opposite of what a compressor does. It's not the opposite, but it's about as opposite as you'll get. Anything that's quiet is going to be quieter. Anything that's louder is going to be closer to its original volume. Now, what we want is to never have that exactly cancel out, okay? We never want to have the level such that it will completely cancel out because we won't hear the vocal. But what we do want to have happen is when the vocal comes through, we only want those loudest moments to come through. And the reason being is that those little bursts of loud parts, they're going to cancel with all the peaks in the other track when we're blending them together. Okay, so let's have a listen to the duplicate. Loving me's like a roller coaster ride. The lows are low, the highs are high. I'll say I love you, just roll your eyes. I think maybe loving me's made you crazy. All our laughter turned to tears. Now you can hear, particularly on that part there's a bit of distortion, and that's to do with the release time. All we need to do really is just to make sure that that release time is long enough that we're not getting distortion. All our left, all our left, all our left. All our left. That's sounding pretty good to me, but I'm thinking maybe it won't fully open, so I'll just move that up a bit. All our laughter turned to tears, while our hopes turned to fear as it all disappeared. you'll notice there that the singer is singing a lot softer. If we can hear it on this track, then that means it's going to be subtracting from the other one. Because we're using phase, we're actually canceling it out. That's not like the operation of a compressor at all. The compressor is reacting to the sound based on the attack and the release settings. In this case, what we're letting through, that is actually canceling partially with the sound. We're essentially using the vocal against itself, which means that in theory, what we're getting is about as close to transparent peak reduction as we possibly can. All right, so at this point in the song, I've got some soft information, I've got some peaks happening, big peak, soft information. Best case scenario is that we get rid of these peaks or at least reduce them, and that should allow us to then take the whole level of the vocal up and have more or less the same effect as compression, but a lot more transparent.
I say I love you, you just roll your eyes. I say I love you, you just roll your eyes.
Let's have a listen to another section. This is without.
The lows are low, the highs are high. The lows are low, the highs are high.
So it's very much softening those. It's not changing the sound too much. I feel like the intent of the singing is still there. I don't feel like it's compressed. It's definitely transparent. Now, I am going to combine these two together, sending them to the lead vocal master, and we shall bounce that out. And here is the result. So it looks like it reduced those peaks, but we could possibly go even more aggressive with the settings. So let's take this down a little bit further. We'll keep it a bit more open. And what else could we do? We could probably take that down a little bit so that as the louder notes hit that, we could start to cancel it a lot more. Let's see how that goes. So I'm going to delete that one and rebounce that. That is looking a lot better. Let's do a comparison between these two, but in order to make it fair, I'm gonna actually turn it up somewhat to match what we had roughly like that to that, for example. So let's have a listen. Actually, before we do that, I'm just gonna send that straight out to there.
Loving me's like a roller coaster ride.
All right, that's the original.
Loving me's like a roller coaster ride. The lows are low, the highs are high.
What about this section here where we had that really abrupt change in volume?
I say I love you, you just roll your eyes. I say I love you, you just roll your eyes.
Hear how transparent that is? Now, it's probably not as loud, so we could maybe turn that up. That in particular though, let's have a listen again.
I say I love you, you just roll your eyes. I say I love you, you just roll your eyes.
Try and get a nicer match there.
I say I love you, you just roll your eyes. I say I love you, you just roll your eyes.
Now, there's not a whole lot of tonal difference between those two. We haven't just pushed it hard into a compressor to get it to that point, and which is the beauty of this technique. I would say the best time to use something like this is before you slap a compressor on it. So I'd go through that process of just knocking off those peaks, make it easier for that compressor to work. Should you end up doing any compression, you essentially lighten the load on that compressor. That in turn will give you more transparent results. Now, I can't hear anything really wrong with how that sounds. Let's have a listen to this section.
All our laughter turned to tears. All our laughter turned to tears.
Sounds pretty good. It's nice and even. You can hear just about every single word in there. It's not perfect, but what we've done is we've managed to reduce those peaks transparently. I keep saying that, but it's true. To a compressor, this kind of peak stuff, that's just going to make it react, and we don't want that. Speaking of compression, we're actually going to use a compressor for technique number 2, and that is definitely unorthodox, I must say. So let's assume, for example, that I like what we've done here, which I do. We're going to consider this to be our new vocal. Maybe I want to knock that down a little bit more. Now, one of the problems with compression is that you can get yourself into trouble sometimes with the attack and the release settings. What I'm about to show you is better explained by what I'm about to do. Go to the end of the track, trim it as much as possible, go to Audio Suite, Reverse, and this is going to hard render a reverse waveform into that. Watch this. What does that sound like? Well, it's pretty weird.
Said what is that? if in rust, boy, right on. Streets and rust is fat right on.
What happens when a vocalist sings? They tend to have this sudden burst of energy, whether it's a consonant at the beginning of a word, this kind of really peak information comes out, and then there's a long sustain. That eventually tapers off, and we can see that in the waveform. If we zoom in, just to really hammer this point home, that's the end of the very last word that's sung, right? When that word was initially sung, we had that peak there, and then we slowly taper off. Obviously, we're looking at this in reverse. So what can we do about this? Well, we can actually use a compressor. And what we're going to do is we're going to get probably more aggressive than we ever could with a normal compressor by having a faster attack. So if you know anything about compression, you know that having a fast attack, when the audio is run forward through the compressor, it's initially going to clamp down on that peak information. If you stuff up your release times and you don't release it fast enough, it's actually going to not release in time, and all of that initially after that transient is going to get turned down as well before it then starts to release. And that's an issue because it can sound not very transparent. This technique, you don't have to worry about that because it's getting eased into that already. So a fast attack is actually just going to start acting on it pretty much straight away. It's going to even it out. It's going to squeeze it from the back. And when it gets to these peaks, it's also eased into those peaks. As it releases, after it gets to that point, it's going to release. It's going to release to the information that happens before that peak. That initial part of the sound, which could be a breath, could be a S sound or something like that, that's going to be a little bit quieter. Well, let's play it through and see how the gain reduction is coping with that. Let's turn that up a bit. For those who don't know, the gain comes after all the compression. Okay, it's got nothing to do with how hard it's going to compress. It's basically, if you compress something, then it's just make up gain. It's making the gain up at the very end. Realistically, we're talking about having the shortest release that we possibly can without distortion. And in terms of the range in which you can play with that to get the result that you want, obviously don't have it so long that it never releases. Realistically, we want to get rid of the peaks. So let's figure out exactly where those peaks are going to be hitting. Something like this, I don't want to be reacting to the compressor. We can set the threshold just at that point, maybe a bit above. Maybe above that level would be good, just as a kind of average. I'm going to soften the knee so that it kind of eases into it a bit. I've got a fast attack, and this is almost certainly going to breach that threshold. You watch that little red dot, it'll go above. Now, how much do we want to compress it? Well, I can increase the ratio. That's probably enough. We don't really need to go too hard. It seems pretty good. I might just back off that release time and let's commit to that. And you can see it there, we've knocked down that. What I might do, so go back and I just add back what we lost. Maybe not that much, maybe about that. Okay, so that's fattened up the sound a little bit. Now, why does this work? It works because it's not surprising the compressor like it would if it was running through it that way, if we were running it through the proper way, because it's easing into that and then it's getting those peaks. Whereas if we run it the other way, the peak information comes first typically and then it eases off. So what this allows the compressor to do is just to start squeezing the sound as we ramp up, and then it hits those peaks and then it just squeezes it a little bit more. My belief is that in some cases you can get it to be a lot more transparent than if you're running it through the other way. I'm going to now go back and reverse that. Let's have a listen.
Loving me's like a roller coaster ride. The lows are low, the highs are high. I'll say I love you, you just roll your eyes. Girl, don't you believe me? This time you'll say yes, then no. You'll say stay, then go. I think maybe loving me's made you crazy. All our laughter turned to tears.
That is so much smoother. So this is where we started.
All our laughter turned to tears.
And I'll bring back our compressed vocal, twice compressed vocal. Just gonna turn that up a little bit.
All our laughter turned to tears. All our laughter turned to tears. While our hopes turned to fear as it all disappeared.
A lot of that softer information is coming up, which is great.
While our hopes turn to fear as it all disappeared.
Sounds pretty transparent to me, definitely unorthodox. If you like what I'm doing here, hit like, subscribe to the channel, share the video if you enjoy what I did, and I'll see you in another one. Happy mixing, guys.
Girl, don't you believe me? This time you'll say yes, then no. You'll say stay, then go. I think maybe loving me's made you crazy.